Please welcome Justin B. Smith, co-founder and CEO of Semafor.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. For those of you in the back, please come up. There's some seats all around. So, welcome to Gallup. Welcome to the Great Hall. It's wonderful to see such a full house, and it's a true testimony to everyone's interest in learning more about this subject of happiness. I'm Justin Smith. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Semafor, which is, we're proud to say, the world's fastest growing independent news platform. We have an amazing team of the world's leading journalists based across here in DC, in New York, on the East Coast, on the West Coast, in London, in Africa, in the Arabian Gulf, and expanding around the world. And our mission is to deliver independent, high-quality news and insights to leaders across the globe. It's a moment in time where I know we're going to talk about happiness, but I just want to take a short interlude on trust in news, because it's a moment in not just American history, but the world's history, when social media, this idea of opinion-infused news, or otherwise known as advocacy journalism, just turn on cable TV to understand what that is, and AI-generated content are, in effect, corrupting our information ecosystem. And Semafor was born to counter this and to try to offer the world a single source of trusted content without ideological or geographic bias. And so we started in 2022, and just over 2 years later, we're now have an audience of almost 1 million subscriptions and 5 million global readers. But that's enough about us. We're thrilled to inaugurate this morning a very special moment on the calendar for Gallup and for ourselves. It's a moment we look forward to every year. As you know, Gallup released the latest World Happiness Report earlier this morning. The report is the leading publication and measure of global happiness, and it provides very valuable interdisciplinary insights into the well-being and happiness of people around the globe. And today, in partnership with Semafor and our live journalism, our journalists will bring this to life in the Gallup Great Hall. And so you'll see a display throughout the conversations of Semafor and Gallup's collaboration on the screen behind me, powered by Gallup's unique statistics. Of course, independent, high-quality journalism requires the support of great brands and partners, and so I would like to express our gratitude first to Gallup, who is a strategic partner of Semafor in many areas, but is today's insights and strategic partner, as well as the Coalition to Empower Our Future, who's also supporting us, and Ajinomoto for their critical role as program partners. Before we welcome Gallup CEO John Clifton on stage to unveil this year's report and rankings, we'll first hear from some of the authors behind the 2025 World Happiness Report. Thank you again for joining us this morning, and I think it's time to cue the video. Thank you.
There's a puzzle. Why do people help one another? If we can get better measures of what leads people to engage in caring, sharing, and generous behaviors, we can get a better understanding of how to address deeper questions of how to build a happier society.
This year, the report is all about how our happiness depends on our social connections.
To create, to foster, to promote caring and sharing communities is a absolutely essential part of promoting our well-being.
The most important thing coming out of this report is the importance of human connections.
The research shows that we're happier when we're thinking of others and when we're caring for others. But there are ways that we can actually amplify our joy of giving.
People around the world, around us, are willing to help each other more than we expect.
We have new data that gauges the extent to which people eat and share their meals with others. And that turns out to be an amazing indicator and predictor of how good you feel about your life.
Why are Latin Americans so happy? We are exploring the role of the family in contributing to this high happiness in Latin America.
In recent years, we observed decline in happiness in young people. Why is that, and what can we do about this?
do societies that have more
volunteering,
more donation, more helping strangers, have fewer deaths of despair.
Living in a society where people do not care, do not share, and do not trust has dramatic consequences when it comes to politics.
Lots of people give to charity, and it's a huge amount of money globally, but there's very little information available to donors on how much difference their money makes. So that's what we looked at.
People want to be able to see how happy they and their fellow citizens are in comparison to other countries, and that brings them into the report, and they see where they rank, and then they ask why, and the report is there to tell them why.
One of the things we hope that the World Happiness Report promotes is the skill of living good lives and building happiness in our societies.
Please welcome John Clifton, CEO of Gallup.
Thank you, Justin, for those remarks and for an amazing partnership. Welcome, everyone, to Gallup, and thank you for being here today as we launch the 2025 World Happiness Report. Now, before I share with you the top 10 rankings, I want to do just a quick history of how we got here, because there were 4 pivotal moments that inspired this particular work and help get this work done. So the first of those pivotal moments was in 1934, when Simon Kuznets went to the American Congress and he recommended that we have a new measure to understand how the economy is going. But that moment, which created the official statistics for the economy, GDP, inspired all of us. Because what it meant is now we could think about what would it look like to create statistics for every single country in the world and to understand how do we measure whether or not societies are progressing or not. After that, fast forward about 70 years later, there was another man, and he said, everything that we know about economics, I'm not sure is entirely right. And that person, who was a member of the Gallup tribe, a senior scientist, was Danny Kahneman. In 2002, he was the first psychologist to win the Nobel in economics for the very reason that he said, this thing that underpins economics, where we say, is it really that people are rational, or is it that people are emotional? That shattered our conventional wisdom of what it meant for economics. Then there was another moment after Danny Kahneman won the Nobel in 2002 for that very moment, which happened right here at Gallup, because our chairman, Jim Clifton, said, what if we actually go build those official statistics for the world to understand the emotional side? What if we went and actually just built the statistics to understand what it means to make a great life? And at that moment, our chairman recruited a number of scholars around the world and said, help us in this pursuit to build this. And I want to read a quote, because at that very moment, there's a video of the late Danny Kahneman, and this is what he said about what it looked like when this initiative was born. And he said, when Jim made the decision to create the Whirlpool, and I can tell you, I thought it was crazy. Here he was, moving into something that is a huge undertaking. He was making commitments, talking of 100 years. He thought he was sort of betting the company, and he did not have a clear business plan that I could see, but he just wanted it done. And he managed to energize the people around him, and he got that done in a record time, and it's working. I think this is the most interesting part, because then Danny Kahneman goes on to say, and it's changed the face of well-being research, and I sometimes compare it to Galileo's telescope, because it provides a way of looking at well-being that was just not available to us earlier. And at that moment, the World Poll was born, and we started building the world's official statistics for what it meant to be a great life. And then there was a fourth key moment that helped bring all this information to life, which was Jeff Sachs reached out and said, is it okay if we use that telescope? And he started recruiting others to join him. In fact, Jan Emanuel Deneve is here today as well. And we started to partner with that group of academics to say, let's start to understand what is it that drives these particular data. So before I show you the results, those are the four key moments inspired by Simon Kuznets that building world statistics is something that's possible. When Danny Kahneman said, well, let's just make sure that all the statistics aren't just rational, that we're also capturing the emotional side. When our chairman, Jim Clifton, said, let's just build it, and we did. And then when Jeff Sachs said, let's partner, and let's create a report that everyone sees as soon as we get the rankings. But in order to pull this off, and I think what Danny Kahneman thought was so remarkable was this, because when we capture this information and we go out to 150 different countries, 40 of those countries we call people in their homes and have lengthy conversations with them. But in the other 100 countries, I want you to see what it looks like. Because we show up to their homes. Not everyone in the world has access to a phone or to the internet. So for us to capture this information, we must sit with them and have a long conversation about their lives. In fact, this is what it looks like in Indonesia, and this is what the conversations look like in Zambia. 150,000 conversations like that take place every single year. And in this report, we've aggregated 3 years, which means we have talked to 500,000 people on the phone or exactly like this. And the stories we hear are remarkable. The question that we're launching today, as you know, is rate your life on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is the worst imaginable life and 10 is the best imaginable life. Where do you stand today? We asked a woman in Kyrgyzstan that exact question. First we said, though, where did you stand 5 years ago? She said back to us, my life is a 2. Then we said to her, how about today? And she said, my life is a 2. And we said, what do you think it'll be in the next 5 years? And she said back to us, a 10. At the end of the interview, our colleague was there. She looked at her and she said, that's a pretty big leap. What is it? Why the change? And she said, I'm pregnant. I'm going to have a son. But those are the conversations that we have had 500,000 of that speak to this report. Because just like when Simon Kuznets said, let's build the world's official statistics so that we can quantify every economic interaction in the world, we use that spirit to build the world's official statistics for every life transaction that takes place in the world. And that's what we're launching today. So, what are the results? These are the top 10 countries from the World's Happiness Report, and the happiest country in the world is Finland. Congratulations to Finland. You'll notice that there are 2 that have joined this list this year, which are Costa Rica and Mexico, and of course the ambassador from Costa Rica is here to help explain why those increases are taking place. And for many of us in here that are Americans, we'll notice that there's one country that is notably absent, which is the United States. And the United States has had some tough years when we're asking people about happiness, and the U.S. has slid all the way down to the mid-20s. And if you look on the other side of the ledger, there's a data point here that has set a new record in our near 20 years of tracking in almost 170 countries where we have asked this particular question, which is Afghanistan. That is a record low. We have never seen a society in the history of our tracking where they have rated their lives as low as Afghanistan does today. But every single year, we focus on a major subcomponent. And this year, the team went in to say, what are some aspects of life that we could see are actually creating that cause behind these happiness indicators? Now, if you look at the very top, one of the things that causes how we see our lives to decline is, of course, whether or not you have a job. Of course, that has horrible consequences for your income, how people perceive purpose, and sometimes, as we've seen with other research, being sedentary when it's involuntary can have negative consequences for a person and for society. But if you look here, because we even looked at information like whether or not your pay is doubled, but we found that one of the greatest correlates to seeing what makes life great is whether or not you live in a society that has community, and whether or not you live in a society where people feel safe. And if you see at the very bottom, one of the strongest things that we can see that would predict whether or not people rate their lives highly is whether or not if you drop a wallet in that particular society, will it get returned to you? It's a reminder that community and generosity also are a massive component about what makes life great. But there's a concern, because there are 3 variables that we look at every single year, and we ask it in every single country, because we want to know what is it that makes community great. Because when it comes to community, we're trying to understand not just do you have your basics, but we also want to understand, do people give back? Do they donate their time? Do they donate their money? And also, do they help people that they don't even know? And remarkably, before the pandemic, the entire world started to see an increase of people with this overwhelming amount of generosity. And 3 years after the pandemic, it continued. But there's a concern, because most recently, when you look at this information, we see that there's been a subtle decline. So a question for us is what are the consequences now that as we look at this information and we see that there's a decline in people just helping each other or people just donating to an organization, are there consequences that society will have when we start to pull apart as a community? Thank you all so much for being here today as we launch these results and having an interest in our work. Thank you.
Joining John Clifton, please welcome Ambassador Lena Kesa-Mikola, Finnish Ambassador to the U.S., Ambassador Svanhildur Holm-Valstottir, Icelandic Ambassador to the U.S., Ambassador Dr. Catalina Crespo-Sancho, Costa Rican Ambassador to the U.S., and Amna Nawaz, co-host at PBS News.
Hi, Catalina, how are you? Good morning, everyone. So nice to be here. Thank you for joining us for a really nice topic to speak about this morning. John Clifton stays with us for this conversation. Thanks for being here and having us.
Thank you for being here.
And of course, joining me on stage are some of the happiest countries on earth represented here. Finnish Ambassador Mikola, Icelandic Ambassador Valstottir, and Costa Rican Ambassador Crespo-Sancho. So congratulations are in order, Ambassador Mikola.
Thank you.
Number one, once again. One of the things the report points out is that the happiest country rankings are a combination of factors, right? GDP, life expectancy, perception of corruption. What is it about Finland, cultural practices, policies, that you think makes you the happiest place on earth?
Well, I think it's many things. And first of all, thanks for inviting me here, and my colleagues are happy to be here today. So I think it's many things. But if you ask an ordinary Finn, are you happy? I think that the answer is mostly that I'm content with my life. So things are okay. And that can be divided into many different elements. And I think if I mention a couple of them, one is trust. You know, we trust our institutions. We trust our fellow citizens. We trust that our neighbors and our colleagues, and even our politicians, you know, they mean well. We might not always agree with them, but we trust that there is a goodwill behind it. Then there is our closeness with nature, and our weekly sauna sessions.
The sauna sessions, I hear, are key, right?
They're actually quite important. They're quite important for most of us, for not all of us. And then I think that also, as parents, we can trust that our education system, wherever we live in Finland, provides citizens that can manage their lives in Finnish society. So they learn the life skills in our society. So there are many things, but you know, we are not really happy. I think our American friends, you smile and laugh much more than we do. But happiness for us is maybe mostly being content, as I said.
Ambassador Valshozer, is there something specific? Is there like a core Icelandic trait that you think allows people to be happy?
Yeah, well, we share a lot of the things that Lena Kajsa just talked about. The trust and, you know, the sort of being a small and cohesive society where we sort of realized a long time ago that burdens shared are so much lighter. So there's a consensus that we all share the responsibility for people's well-being and equal opportunities, whether it is for education or access to health care or having a paid parental leave for both parents. But at the core, I think that maybe that would be, you know, going with the flow. It's, yeah, we are so used to things changing. The weather changes every 15 minutes, and, you know, we have a really unpredictable nature. I think there might even, you know, a new volcanic eruption being starting today. I know that, you know, everyone is sort of expecting that, but that has been happening, for instance, every 2 or 3 months for the past couple of 3 or 4 years, and that can, you know, happen quite frequently. But what that does is that we just adapt to it, and I think adaptability plays a great role in how we sort of see things and how we react to things. So we have this saying that I'm not really sure, it doesn't quite translate, but we say, "Þetta reddast." And that doesn't mean, you know, that it actually means that things will work out. But it doesn't mean that "Þetta reddast" is allowing us just to sit back and wait for them to work themselves out. We do everything that we can to make things, you know, go as well as possible, but we usually know that we need to have a plan A and B and C, and sometimes we need to use the rest of the alphabet. But, you know, it's adaptability that plays a big role in how we sort of, you know, make things work out.
Yeah.
Because it, you know, they have to reddast.
Ambassador Crespo-Sancho, what about you? What about Costa Rica makes people so happy?
So let me give you an example. Okay. So have you all seen sloths? You know, they're very slow. Okay, that's our national animal. Let's start there. And I would say that the Costa Rican vibe is one that we call it pura vida. We use pure life for everything. We say hello, we say goodbye, we're doing well. Everything is pura vida. So if you ever go to Costa Rica, you will see everything is pura vida. So sloths, if you look at, let's go back to sloths. If you look at sloths, they're very slow, yes, but nobody wants to eat them, right? They do not want to eat anyone or any of the other animals in the forest. They get along with everyone. All the animals get along with them. However, they get to where they need to get, even though it takes forever to cross a road. So it took us 10 years to be part of OECD, yes, 10 years, but we did it. So I think that's it. It's like getting along with everyone. It's respecting the other person in front of you, respecting yourself. It's like, okay, everything is pura vida. I think that's the Costa Rican part. And let me rephrase another important part. We're one of the few countries in the world that does not have an army. So that does make a difference, because all of that, not every country can do that.
Yeah.
However, Costa Rica, all that money they invested in things that our Nordic countries here have been doing for many, many years.
Things like?
Education, social services, health, access. So what my colleagues have just said, Costa Rica has invested in that.
I think we need more sloths in America, too.
We actually have a saying for that in Iceland as well. It's good things happen slowly.
Yes, you see?
I'm sensing a theme here. In addition to the saunas, more saunas and more sloths. But John, for Finland to be #1 again, this is how many years in a row now?
8 years in a row.
8 years in a row. Is that a new record? Is it unprecedented for this kind of survey?
It's definitely a new record. I think what it is it's an indicator that leadership is working. You know, almost every indicator that we look at with respect to Finland, we find that everything kind of looks great. You know, one of the questions that we pose to the entire world is, do you think that corruption is widespread within your government? We also ask, do you think corruption is widespread in your businesses? And when you look across so many different countries, you look at the percentages and you think to yourself, man, it just must be a given that everybody thinks corruption is just widespread in their governments. Then you go to Finland, it's not true. The numbers aren't outrageously high like they are in so many other countries, like right here at home. And so I think this is an indicator because at the end of the day, I think what most governments are inspired by is how do you create a greater life for everybody that lives in the country? Mm-hmm. And I think this is a report that says people are reflecting that very answer.
In this current context, though, Ambassadors Mikkola and Valshotir, I'm interested to hear your answer to this. There's obviously a time of growing tension around the world, geopolitical tension. You've got absolutely potential, knock-on effects from the war, Russia's war in Ukraine, knocking on your doorstep, you in particular, Ambassador Mikkola. I wonder how the perception of stability, of security, of uncertainty, how all of that impacts the happiness of your constituents.
Well, I can't say that we are immune to what's going on in the world, and you mentioned in particular in our closer neighborhood what's going on in Ukraine. So we very much feel for them, and we are concerned about the fate of the country, as it will influence also us in broader Europe. But at the same time, we have always been prepared for more difficult times. We have to, because of our history and because of our location in the map. And everybody understands the need for preparedness. And that also means that we actually have an army. And we will have an army also in the future. But in addition to that, we have been able to build a welfare society, which once again I underline is based on trust. And even during these difficult times globally and in Europe, the trust has remained. And I think somehow the sense of being together has perhaps even grown.
How do you think that trust has maintained? Because we've seen so many places where that trust in institutions has steadily declined. What is it about Finland or its leadership that allows that to sustain?
It's a good question, and I'm trained as a lawyer, so maybe I should be a political scientist, a sociologist, but I think it's partly cultural, mm-hmm. and also we are a small country, and so it's of course quite homogeneous country still. So it perhaps is easier to maintain this level of trust in a country like Finland, and where we actually, looking to the West, we have close neighbors, the Nordic countries, with which we share the same values and expectations for a good life.
Ambassador Valshotir, what's your take on that, especially in the context of where we are right now?
I agree with you. I could just almost say ditto to what my colleague just said. I think that, the concept of safety, because Iceland is one of the safest countries in the world, it plays quite a big role in how we feel about ourselves and, gives us this feeling of, content and happiness. Mm. But also we are not, like Lena-Kaisa said, we are not immune to what's happening in the world. And we, of course, feel for Ukraine and every nation in the world that's dealing with conflict. That makes us maybe, feel even more gratitude for our position in the world. We don't have a military either, but we understand that that makes us in a way vulnerable, and we have understood that for decades. So we have a defense agreement with the US, and we are also part of NATO. And we welcomed, both Finland and Sweden when they joined a short while ago. But it's just that I think that what we what contributes to our feeling of happiness or content is also what Lena Kaiser talked about, is that we are a small nation that can't be replicated everywhere, understandably. But when you know people, when you talk to people, when you have the proximity of other people, it's easier maybe to trust, and channels of communications are shorter, which makes maybe things a little bit more easier when something goes sideways, or there is a trouble that you want to address, or a problem you want to address. So I think that, yeah, well, you had quite a big question. It's kind of hard to, answer that in this global context.
Yeah.
But, I think that what has also happened is that, because we're not immune to this sort of changing global situation, is that there is more emphasis on defense, on, increasing defense expenses.
Mm-hmm.
There is more discussion about it, which hasn't been the case in Iceland for, I think, ever. It's more now than it has been maybe even during the Cold War.
Yeah. John, this idea that size matters, that the smaller the country is, it's easier to maintain a sense of happiness or contentment. Is that a trend? Is that something you've seen in years past?
Not necessarily, only because I think one of the greatest outliers and one of the greatest mysteries from this research is a very small country in Africa who is often known as the Switzerland of Africa, Rwanda. All of us are really familiar with the fact that during the Millennial Development Goals, Rwanda had tremendous improvements and was successful on almost every single front. But when we go to Rwanda and ask people to rate their lives, they rate their lives among the worst in the world. And it is quite puzzling. We don't officially have an answer for it. And so I don't know that size entirely accounts for all of it.
Mm-hmm. No, but peace and safety does. And that's not something that the Rwandans have had, all the time. We have been happy, and we know that we're privileged. We're privileged of being in, relatively small nation with, great social security.
Mm-hmm.
And also, this cohesiveness that I talked about, that makes us share the responsibility for each other. And also, a lot of freedom, because when you have a safe country, your kids and your cats roam free. It's just, kids hang out with their friends, and, they don't schedule play dates. We actually don't schedule anything. I'm sure, my Scandinavian friends are now scheduling dinners with their friends in week 39. No one in Iceland knows when week 39 is. I also have a cat that, spends half the day at the local cafe and the rest at the local bakery,
That's
bringing joy to everyone that meets him. So I'm pretty sure that contributes to happiness.
That is a good life. That is a good life. Meanwhile, Ambassador Crespo-Sancho, the story of Costa Rica is one of rising through the rankings, right? This is your first year cracking the top 10, I understand?
No, I think the first year, we were in the top?
Yeah?
Yeah, number 1 many years ago.
It wasn't, so I think the confusion, and there's a bit of a debate around this, on are we measuring, in this report, happiness? What I mean is when you go to Webster's and you look up the definition of happiness, it gets even more confusing because the definition has 2 parts. One is this idea of contentment, and the second part is this sort of ephemeral or fleeting aspect of happiness. And so which one is it that we're measuring? So we have a different variable that we measure, which is we just ask people, do you have a lot of enjoyment in your life? Do you laugh and smile a lot? When you rank countries based on those positive emotions, or what we call positive affect, the top 10 countries in the world are not the Nordic countries. There 8 out of 10, I think, usually are Latin American countries. And oftentimes you hear people, when they consume that information, they say, nobody has fun, nobody experiences joy like Latin Americans. And so that might be what we're talking about on those original findings.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
But on the rising through the rankings, on the improvement, is that an economic story? I mean, what's fueling that?
I think I was looking at all the rankings, and we all do pretty well, in GDP, but there's other things going on there. And it's beyond. It's what you are all saying. It's the quality of life that we have. So I wouldn't say it's only economics, because Costa Rica has been doing well. You know, we live in a very complex region. Central America has been known for quite a bit of internal wars and other issues. I think it's more related to what I mentioned before. And what my colleagues have mentioned: a good education system, a good health system, a good community where in the end we take care of each other. And that sense of, I grew up and my kids grew up and my parents and grandparents grew up with this idea of peace is important. You respect the other person in front of you. Your environment, take care of your environment. As you all know, Costa Rica is pretty well known for environmental topics. And it's about also, how do you live and work and just share your life with the other people who are not necessarily Costa Ricans? 20%, almost 20% of our population are migrants. And you don't hear about Costa Ricans having issues with migrants at all. Because they adapt and we work together. And of course there's issues here and there because there's human conflict. But how is it that happens? The education system is, I would say, fundamental for that.
So you're diplomats, so you'll answer this diplomatically, but in the minute or so we have left, if you could each briefly, you're very familiar with American policy, American culture being posted here. America's now fallen, I think, to its lowest ranking, one of the lowest rankings it's had on the happiness report. If you had a piece of advice for how Americans might be happier, one thing you might suggest. Let's just go down the line.
Well, let me start with 4 things. Oh. But again, it's at the Costa Rican point of view.
Yes.
Not a criticism to any country. It's what we have done that works in our country. Not necessarily will work everywhere. Education, as we mentioned, you have to give people the skills to get a job, to get along, to learn the basic skills on respecting others. That comes at home and also in the education system. Good health, take care of your people. They need to be healthy, and they can't go to a hospital and then, have a lot of money that they have to pay after for education and health. That does not make people very happy. Then the number 3 is the peace issue in a personal matter, but also in your environment, working with your neighbor or with your fellow countries next to you or fellow countries not so next to you. How do we work in peace? And the 4th, which is related to all of those 3, is good social connections. If you have good education, good health, good peace, you will have social connections because we have good times and we have bad times. When we have bad times, we need a support system. How do we get that support system? It could be friends, it could be family, but those social connections are really important.
Everything she said, and also increase women's participation in everything. You need more women labor participation. You need more women in decision making. I think one of the key infrastructures in Iceland is a heavily subsidized daycare system, so you don't have to choose between having a family, between having children, and having a career. So I would say, women leadership, go for that.
Ambassador Mikkel, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I've been a diplomat for more than 30 years, and I learned that it's not very advisable to give advices for the countries that you are stationed. But what I would say is that for all of us that enjoy simple things, and tomorrow I'm going to have a day off. I'm going to spend 1.5 hours drinking my morning coffee and reading the newspapers. Then I go for a walk. Then I go to a bookstore, and in the evening I go to sauna, and that is a perfect day.
That is a good day indeed. Please join me in thanking the ambassadors of Finland, Iceland, Costa Rica, and Ghana. Thank you all.
Please welcome Chika Marishima, Executive Officer and Vice President at Ajinomoto, Jan Emmanuel Deneuve, Director at Wellbeing Research Center, and Dr. Alden Lay, Board Member for Wellbeing for Planet Earth Foundation.
Good morning. When we think about food and well-being, our minds often go to nutritional value or what people need to feel nourished. But Ajinomoto, the University of Oxford, and Gallup started to think differently. They wondered, what if we saw food as a social activity so that we can understand its impact on well-being? This is groundbreaking work. It's also the basis of Chapter 3 of this year's World Happiness Report. I'm really keen to dig into this topic further because most of us eat several meals a day, so there are many opportunities for us to be building and maintaining social bonds with each other. Let me introduce myself. My name is Alden Lai. I'm a board member at the Wellbeing for Planet Earth Foundation and also an assistant professor at NYU. I would like to introduce Chika Marishima, Vice President of Sustainability and Communications at Ajinomoto. So for those of you who might not be familiar with Ajinomoto as a company, they are a pioneer in amino acid technology that's been used across many industries, including agriculture, healthcare, and semiconductors. And they started as the world's first umami food seasoning company in Japan more than 110 years ago. So if you've ever wondered how the word umami entered the modern lexicon, it's because of Ajinomoto. Next, I would like to introduce Jan Emmanuel Deneuve, Professor and Director of the Wellbeing Research Center at the University of Oxford. I think Oxford needs no introduction. And we have Shiori on stage, who's acting as interpreter for Chika. So let's get started. Chika and Jan, first of all, I would really like to congratulate you for, and your colleagues for putting together this excellent chapter and the groundbreaking work. And my first question will be for Chika. Why is Ajinomoto interested in the relationship between food and well-being, which is, we never quite think about that oftentimes to begin with?
Yeah, thank you. Our contention is well-being is not only shaped by what people eat, but also how people eat. While the relationship between food, nutrition, and physical well-being is well researched and understood, there has been less exploration of the connection between how people prepare and consume food and their sense of well-being. Over the years, we have been deeply curious about the relationship between food and subjective well-being. This led us to suppose the Gallup World Poll, which created an opportunity to contribute to this year's World Happiness Report.
Thank you, Chika. I will next turn to Jan. Jan, can you tell us can you highlight for us some of the findings from this research around food and well-being?
Thank you, Alden. Thank you, and wonderful to be here. Yes, and let me backtrack a little bit by saying that for the past 13 years, the World Happiness Report has always emphasized the social elements that underpin our human well-being and the way that people rate the quality of their lives, and as measured thanks to the Gallup World Poll. So we've always looked beyond the usual suspects of income, GDP per capita, the way it's distributed, and healthy life expectancies. And you will have noticed that social support plays such an important role. So in this year's report, right here, we focused on the theme of caring and sharing because we wanted to put more meat on the bone of that social support element. And in no small part, the whole theme of this year's report was inspired by coming across a survey item in the Ajinomoto module that was part of the Gallup World Poll now 2 years ago. And the specific item that had a real light bulb go off in our heads amongst the academics was an item that was asked over the past week, over how many of your lunches were shared with somebody else? And over the past week, how many of your dinners were shared with somebody else? And that seemingly basic question, so close to home, immediately flashed in our heads, wait a second, this is a way of quasi-objectively measuring the strength of people's social ties, their social capital, if you will, and the social support they can rely on as a result. And lo and behold, when we started digging into this wonderful item on the Ajinomoto module on the world poll, huge variation around the world. There's countries out there where out of a possible 14, so 7 lunches, 7 dinners shared, only about 3 or 4 are shared with others. And there's countries out there, and Latin America as the region with the most of those, where the average is more like 11 or 12 out of 14 being shared. So you're starting to get a hint also why the Latin American countries, and specifically Mexico and Costa Rica, are moving up. They might not, they're punching above their weight in terms of happiness, not because of GDP or because of healthy life expectancy, but because of the social ties and the quality of them that they have. Now, that was a general population well-being level insight. But if we look at the individual level around the world, just how powerful is this indicator for our social lives and driving well-being? That's where the real surprise came for the academic team, because we knew social support and social connections were important. We didn't know just how important they were. If you look at all individuals in the world poll responding to this question and you tie it to their well-being, turns out their correlation is as strong as their employment status and our relative income, which, by the way, is more important than absolute income in explaining life satisfaction. So hugely, hugely important, and huge variations between people and countries, and this helps explain differences in population well-being. The relationship is strong for everybody between sharing meals and well-being. It is particularly strong for youth, as it turns out. So if you slice and dice it by generations, the coefficient is stronger for people below 30. And this is where the following insights became very disturbing. In the United States, we benefit from the American Time Use Survey, where they have a similar item running for 20 years. It's the one country that allowed us to dig a bit deeper and do a deep dive. And what we found there was, sit tight, there's been a 53% increase in dining alone in the United States over the past 2 decades, since 2003 to be precise. Even worse, if you slice and dice it by age groups, there's a 1.8, so 180% increase, almost a doubling of dining alone for people below 30. And that has been picking up gradually, but steadily and increasingly so in the last 5-6 years. So youth today in America are way more likely to be spending their lunches and dinners alone, and that's really, really disconcerting. You may recognize this kind of language from a famous book by Robert Putnam that some of you will be familiar with. He wrote in the early 2000s a book that became known as Bowling Alone. I think what we found, thanks to the Ajinomoto module and the Gallup World Poll, is essentially the revisit of Putnam's famous Bowling Alone, which was published, I think, in 2003. What we're seeing here is essentially the dining alone version, more data, more granular, and the trends that he started raising alarm bells about around the undermining and of our social capital in our societies, those trends have only gotten worse since. And so I'm sorry to have to finish on this negative note. Hopefully there will be positive lessons to be learned, and we'll talk about this in a second. But the reality is that in this era of social isolation that we're increasingly in, which is a driver of political polarization, that it is now absolutely essential to try and get people back around the table together, because that is vital for our individual and collective well-being.
Thank you, Jan. So now that we know the importance of shared meals, but also at the same time we're observing worrying trends in some countries in terms of like youth dining alone, Chika, how are these findings informing how you folks are thinking and acting as a company?
Social systems around the world need to be strengthened to increase opportunity for people to enjoy cooking and eating together. Ajinomoto Group has implemented initiative to support sharing nutrition meals together. For example, it supports the children cafeteria, a place where children from disadvantaged families eat nutrition meals together. Through a sustainable financial supporting mechanism that everyone can easily support, as well as increasing the opportunity for eating together. It is also important to reduce barriers for the private and public sectors in preparing tasty and nutritious meals. Ajinomoto aims to improve people's well-being through cooking and eating together by providing products and recipes that enable everyone to easily prepare delicious meals for their important people, and by taking initiative and communication that encourage people to cook and eat together.
It's really inspiring to hear that Ajinomoto has created sustainable solutions to help disadvantaged families to be sharing meals together to maintain that kind of like social bonds. I think maybe I'll kind of like move on to invite the panelists to maybe share one departing thought. I mean, this is really meant as a teaser for you folks to be reading the chapter as well, because I just think that the findings are really so important. We just never quite think about the contributions of sharing meals. So maybe I'll come to Jan. Do you have a departing thought for our audience to get them excited to think more about the relationship between food and well-being?
Yes, well, obviously the main insight is get back together around the dinner table, make sure you're present, and try and share more lunches, breakfast lunches, and dinners with other people. Now, fun fact, and I'll finish on this. Is there an optimal number of shared meals? As it turns out, it's not 14 out of 14 either. The optimal number of shared meals is 13 out of 14. So we do need a little bit of me time. But clearly, most of us, I presume even in this room, are not sharing 13 out of 14 meals together. And so there's a lot of room for improvement and a lot of policy and a lot of organizational efforts to be put in place to get us to about 13 out of 14 together.
Thank you, Jan. And Chika, perhaps one departing thought for the audience.
Yes, in the months ahead, we plan to enter into a partnership with that supports the development of concrete guidance for actions that can help policymakers take steps to improve well-being outcome and in turn foster higher levels of happiness. Everyone knows that a good meal with people you care about put a smile on your face. As long as we live, everyone will eat. I believe that food is one of the easiest and most inclusive solutions to improve the well-being of society.
Thank you, Chika. Let's now start planning our next 13 meals with people so that we can smile and have food together. Thank you again for panelists.
Please welcome Robert Egger, founder of DC Central Kitchen and co-founder of the World Central Kitchen, and Amna Nawaz, co-host of PBS News.
Joining us now is Robert Egger from New Mexico. He helped co-found the World Central Kitchen with Jose Andres. He started the DC Central Kitchen nearly 35 years ago, and he's with us to talk about the power of sharing meals. Robert, so good to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, right on, man. It's a joy.
So, one of the reasons I'm so excited to talk to you is you just heard in the previous conversation, the World Happiness Report finds that sharing meals is an exceptionally strong indicator of subjective well-being. It's on par with things like income and unemployment. This probably doesn't surprise you, given the work that you do, but I'm just curious for your take. Why do you think that is? I mean, what is so powerful about sharing a meal?
Well, it's funny. I've been in the metaphorical hunger biz my entire career, but I've always believed there's a deeper hunger in the world. People long to be connected. They long to be needed. They long to have impact. And this has been borne out through my work over the years. I mean, when I first got started, the traditional model that I experienced as a volunteer was people prepare a meal in a kind of a church basement and go out and feed people on the streets. And, on the first night I did that, it was raining in front of the White House, and we were serving people in a long line down the street. And I respected the intent and the history of the model, but I felt like it was based more on the redemption of the giver, not the liberation of the receiver. So I really kind of stewed on that for a little bit and came back up with this idea of the DC kitchen. And the big leap was not that we prepared food made from food donated from restaurants and hospitals and farmers, but that we offered men and women who were homeless, coming home from prison, out of drug programs, a chance to be part of the solution and help prepare the meals while they learned a skill. And that was unexpectedly joyful in that for so many men and women, the fact that they showed up day after day after day to produce thousands of meals that were going to go out and serve people on the streets of DC, but they felt like they were needed. Like 2 weeks ago, they might have been in prison, but here they were in a job training program, and they were helping to put the city back together again. And I think that's only a small bit of the kind of role that I've seen food play in helping people stand up and feel like I'm needed. I have a role, I'm contributing something. And that, I think, is the real opportunity.
Given all that, tell us a little bit more about your work in DC, in LA, now in New Mexico, addressing hunger, but also this idea of what you call dignified food. Tell us about that.
Well, I think when most people hear that, they're going to immediately think, that means a nice looking product. And of course, I mean, that's I've been in food service all my life. That's the kind of golden rule. But I just became so interested in the power of food. So, going back to DC, one of the big things that we adopted was a side-by-side model where every single day we'd have anywhere between 25 and 50 volunteers. And they would come in nervous. As you can imagine, I mean, DC Kitchen for decades was based in the big shelter at 2nd and D Street downtown. And again, we were producing 5,000 meals every single day, 7 days a week. And so for many people, when they walked in the back door of the biggest homeless shelter in America, they were nervous. And we had a very short period of time to not only get the meals produced, but to inspire what we call this kind of calculated epiphany, that by going out into the kitchen and working side by side with people who were enrolled in the job training program, this kind of interesting thing would happen where the students who were still wrestling with their sense of their past and the kind of question of their future suddenly were looked at by this legion of volunteers as experts, as people who are going to guide them through the day. And you would listen to the kind of rhythm of the kitchen as it would be silent, and then you'd start to hear confidence, you'd hear talking, you'd hear laughter. And that kind of magic, if you will, of we're working together. Our model was always based on that idea, whether you're a kid who has to get service to graduate high school, an elder who wants to stay active. On many occasions, the president of the United States and their family, and then someone in the job training program who, again, might have been in jail a year earlier, suddenly working together side by side. And the power of food is when the president, and this happened every single time, man, because they might be smart dudes, but didn't know how to cut a carrot. And for the power of a student to have the president lean over and say, am I doing this right? And for that person to really just suddenly realize and be able to say, no, sir, you're actually not. Here's how you do it. That's the power of food, and that's the power of community, where everybody rises together.
Well, you probably know there's been this well-documented correlation between people who face hunger and also those who experience high rates of loneliness. Given all that, how critical is it that an organization like yours, a direct service provider, also build in ways to build community, not just to provide food?
That's such a profound question. And I have to admit, it was only recently here in New Mexico that I had kind of my most recent, head slap moment. Because I'm very proud of my work. Over the years between DC Kitchen, LA Kitchen, World Central Kitchen, we're cracking like 500 million meals. And each one has taken the kind of idea of how you distribute meals, how you prepare them up a step. Like World Central Kitchen, for example, The historic model is that aid groups bring food into disaster areas. We took a big leap by saying, let's go in and let's buy local food, let's hire local chefs, let's produce local foods. And that, again, it sounds obvious, but it wasn't at the time. And I think it's a profound leap that I hope other aid groups embrace. But for decades, I spent, so much of my time really working on the first 90%. Where do I get the food? How do I get it safely? How do I engage volunteers, teach people jobs, or get people jobs? All that kind of stuff, expand the model. But we still relied upon, and I hope the members of your audience, both live there and whoever might be watching this will really take this in. I delivered meals to homeless shelters, to senior centers, to school programs, in effect dividing people. Again, I put so much emphasis on food, but yet I said, here's where kids eat, here's where seniors eat. And if you want to self-identify as poor, come to this pantry and get a meal. And I was here in New Mexico and I went to a fiesta in our little tiny village. And here was a village full of the weirdest collection of malcontents. Literally bikers, libertarians, tweakers, retirees, everyone eating side by side. And I slapped my head, wishing I could go back in time and realize that while all the meals we produced were beautiful, I wish I had done more to get people to sit down side by side. And I think that echoes a lot of what the previous panel said. And I hope more food banks and pantries and the larger anti-hunger movement embraces that bigger opportunity to use food to bring people together, not just to feed them.
You mentioned absolutely. You mentioned the senior community that you serve. You also know this report is found across the world, not just here in the States, across the world, people aged 60 and older are the least likely to sit down and share meals. Is that something you've seen through your work? And what are the consequences of that for that generation?
Oh, this is big league ball here because every single day, this morning, 10,000 people woke up 70 in America, and that's going to happen every single morning. And the majority are women. Women outlive men, women outnumber men. So aging is a feminist issue. But going back to our previous discussion about segregation, we're hearing now a lot, particularly with potential cuts, about Meals on Wheels. And we instinctively, many of us know Meals on Wheels, wow, let's get meals to elders at home. Yet for people to eat alone night after night, I think we're missing this incredible loneliness epidemic. And this is global. There's never, ever in the history of the world been a time in which this many people will live this long. And so I think we really need to abandon kind of our stereotypes and our soft bigotries about elders and really embrace an intergenerational approach to everything. Again, if I could go back in time, I would really, again, go at that kind of idea of kids over here and seniors over here. I mean, it's funny, and I'll kind of, I know we have a short amount of time, but we talk a lot in my biz and in the food biz about agriculture. But I those two words, sometimes we put them together so quickly, we don't really think about agriculture. And I'm fascinated by the culture that we abandoned over the decades in which families, friends, neighbors dined together, whether it was the birth of a child or a death of a loved one. People brought covered dishes in times of emergencies or even in times of joy. In fact, my daughter's about to get married and we're going to have a wedding feast here for the village. But those notions of how we come together over food, I really think we need to abandon the idea food is just gas for the body and realize it's fuel for a revolution, and that revolution is happiness.
So we've only got a few seconds left, but I got to ask, you've been doing this 35 years now. In terms of happiness, what is it about this work that makes you happy? How do you think about that?
Oh, it's funny. At the end of the day, it's tragic because I know with homelessness in particular, and I'll be a little bit pointing here, but I know that there's parents all around America whose children have just kind of wandered off into the streets, and whether it's addiction, mental health, or just homelessness. And I know how many of those parents ache, hoping their kids are safe somewhere. And that idea that, that we're putting out meals, that at least, again, somebody can come inside and see a warm face, have a warm meal. I think to a certain extent, I know how I'd feel if my child was out there. And so there's an element of our work, and I think collectively of our movement, in which there's a great sense of we're there for the people who can't be, and we're the parents, the neighbors, the friends that aren't there. And if I can just be that simple about it, it's a joy to know, to see on someone's face that someone cares about them. That's all it is.
Robert Egger, thank you so, so much for the work you do, and thank you for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. Please join me in thanking Robert Egger.
Please welcome Karen Guggenheim, co-founder of the World Happiness Summit, Russell Shaw, head of school at Georgetown Day School, Gretchen Rubin, author and founder of the Happiness Project, and Gina Chan, senior editor at Semafor.
Hi, thank you all for joining us today on this gorgeous day, and thank you, Karen, for bringing that weather from Miami. We are here to talk about a serious topic that is dear to my heart because I have a 7-year-old and think about, you know, how her life is going to evolve, especially with all the technology and other things at her fingertips. And this report really highlighted, you know, some of the issues facing our youth today all over the world, where we're seeing social disconnections, loneliness, feeling isolated, prevalent in various countries, and unfortunately increasing. And hopefully we can talk today about how to address some of those issues. So Karen, I wanted to start with you as someone who, I think you have your World Happiness Summit coming up this week, so it's very apropos. But given that this report showed this upsetting and sort of disturbing evidence, you talk about a holistic approach needed to reverse these trends. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, thank you so much, and it's a joy to be here with all of you and everyone watching online. We just had the summit actually this weekend, and you know, as I was walking over here, what really dawned upon me is that it's really about people. You know, I mean, we understand that, we know that, but it's really about people increasing connection. And when we're talking about our youth and the advances in technology, I think that we forget that moment for spontaneous connection. So even if you ask somebody, hey, where's the local coffee shop? Do you know if it's going to rain today? These micro moments of connection, I think that because of technology and the ease of technology, and we know so many things cognitively, we need to move that cognitive knowledge into heart knowledge, into connection with other people. And the holistic approach that I'm talking about is bringing this in education, bringing this in organizations, in trainings, in all different areas of life, because I feel like sometimes we're in silos, or in government, or in businesses, and we have these short-term gains that we want to have, and we want to see it right away. We're talking about people. We're talking about relationships. These take times, and I think our youth, I think there are two things. One is that we are disconnected because we think we're connected because of technology, but we remove these micro moments of connection. And the other thing is that we need to build resilience. So last year we had the honor of having the former Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, at our London summit, and he talked about visiting universities. And he said he went into the hall where all the students are supposed to be talking to each other, and it was packed, and it was silent. Everybody was on their phone texting each other. And then he asked them, why are you not talking to each other? And he said, And they said, we feel uncomfortable because maybe you won't want to talk to me. Or imagine, we need youth that feels okay if you say, hey, I'll get back to you, or I don't know where that is. So we need that level of resilience, but that only comes through training, which means having those moments of micro connections again and again. And in the work that we do with the summit, we promote the science, but also we give people the opportunity to connect with each other. And that's really where the magic happens. We need to talk to each other. We need to see smiles. We need to touch. We need to smell, because that is, being in tune with our biology.
So that's a great way to pivot to you, Russell, as an educator. The report also talks about how young people are underestimating their peers' empathy and how that's affecting their relationships. You wrote in The Atlantic last August about banning phones at the Georgetown Day School. My daughter just the other day asked me about when she was going to get her phone. Her dad said when you're 18, but we'll see if that actually happens. But did you have to deal with like a mutiny at your school, or was it embraced? How did the students react to that, and did you see changes in their behavior as a result?
The kids have put up a statue of me at the school to celebrate the decision. Look,
you're now a god.
Exactly. When my parents were in high school in the 1950s, they would go through the cafeteria line, and the last thing they got put on their tray was a little sample pack of cigarettes. And it was a way to build brand loyalty. And we hear that in 2025, and we say that's insane. And I bet in 25 years, people are going to say, wait, they had phones in school? Are you kidding me? Yeah. So I will tell you, I have 3 kids, 2 of whom have graduated and are in college, and my youngest is a senior. And she said to me, this summer, Dad, are you kidding me? You're going to do this right before my senior year? You're going to take the phones out of school? 2 weeks into the school year, she said to me quietly, and this was a huge admission from a 17-year-old, she said, I think it was a good decision.
Wow.
I think it's better, because what is happening is in our shared spaces, instead of everybody looking at their screens, they are pushing back past those initial moments of discomfort and then having spontaneous conversations with each other. They are playing hacky sack. They are saying, let's order a pizza. They are doing things that high school kids are supposed to do rather than retreating to the safety of technology, which we do too, right? We are in lines and we take out our phones because we don't want to risk having a conversation with somebody else in line, when all of the research tells us that conversation is actually going to have a positive impact on our well-being. So it is one intervention that schools can make, but I think it's an incredibly powerful and impactful intervention that can help kids feel less isolated, more connected, and ultimately more healthy.
Well, Gretchen, you talked about how there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and part of understanding how to be happy and what that means for you means understanding yourself. For young people who are still figuring that out and kind of, searching for who they are, what is your advice to them in terms of discovering what happiness means to them?
Well, I think the report had all kinds of really helpful information. One is just quantity. Another is quality, another is structure, to think about all of this as we're thinking about our friendships. One of the things that was really interesting is it looked at when college students made a lot of friends early upon arrival, that was a great predictor of whether they had strong relationships and a happier life as college continued. So one of the things is when you're in a new place, make a special effort, reach out for those new relationships, because it's really going to pay off over the long term. I thought another thing that was really interesting is that the structure of our relationships matters as well, and that high density relationships, which just basically means like, are you friends with the friends of your friends? Like, does everybody kind of know each other? Are you part of a group? Are you part of a team? Do you live in a hall together? Do you live in a neighborhood where you run into each other all the time? That's going to boost your happiness as well, because there tends to be a greater sense of cohesion and a sense of belonging when it's not just a bunch of people who you randomly know who don't know each other. You're actually part of a social network. But then there are differences in how people like to relate. Some people are more extroverted. Some people, find that a little bit harder. And one of the interesting things from the research was that everybody gets a little boost from social engagement, even something like talking to a store clerk or talking to somebody who has a cute dog on the sidewalk. But if you're in that mode where you need restorative solitude, you might need to give that to yourself, and you might need more than somebody else needs of that time. And yet when you are ready to make that connection, even a very small connection with somebody else, that is going to pay off. And I have to say, I think that this idea of like not being on headphones, not being on your phone, it just signals your availability. People don't want to be rude. They don't want to interrupt you. And by being available for these like micro moments, little connections, that does lead the way to deeper connections, and also just the lift that we get from connecting with other people in a very small way.
Yeah. So understanding sort of when you want to be alone and when that's actually healthy for you, and when you want to be around other people.
When you're having your 10th dinner alone and, you're like, okay, I need to push myself to go out and eat around other people, or I'm going to work in the library instead of working in my room.
Karen, in terms of the conversation about loneliness and isolation that really came to the forefront during the pandemic, and what we all experienced, and especially our younger population, what have you seen about the conversation around happiness, loneliness, isolation over these last 5 years? Has the conversation changed? Have you seen any leaders, policymakers actually address these issues in a meaningful way?
Well, again, I have to cite Dr. Murthy, who made it his campaign to do that. He did bulletins as a Surgeon General, so there's a lot of work that he did to bring this to the forefront. And he actually called well-being the issue of our time. So I think that that's definitely one of them. I think that also it's incredibly important to have gatherings like this, where we bring data to the forefront. So of course the work that Gallup is doing, and the World Wellbeing Movement, as well as the work with the World Happiness Report. Because the very first thing we need to do is raise awareness. If we're not aware, we're not going to make any changes. And so I think that the challenge that I'd like to give to everyone who's listening here today is, what are you going to do? Now we know that this is out there. We have a lot of evidence here. It's all over the place. It's, we are at a point where our youth is not doing well. It's just not. And we can fix this. It's incredibly empowering that we can actually do something about this. And there's enough data, there's trainings, there's research, there are books that can be done. And, don't wait for this magic KPI. Our patient is bleeding out. Let's go in there and triage and build the societies that we all want to live in. And those are happier societies who are well, and our children, my God, how important are our children for the present and the future? So I think that a focus on children's well-being and youth well-being, and how decreased loneliness and increased connection, as well as everything else, will have a multiplicative positive effect for society. And guess what? They'll perform better in the metrics that we want them also. They perform better in school, they learn better, they make more money. So it's really a forward, holistic view of what our society can and should look like.
Yeah. Well, Russell, on that front, in terms of what can be done with educators, aside from sort of taking away their phones, what do you think should be done at schools? Should this be a part of the curriculum? Should this be something that, if you go to school to get to want to teach later, that this should be part of something that educators learn about so they can sort of pass it on to their students? How should this play a role in the school system?
So absolutely, schools need to be thinking about the wellness of their kids, and there are a range of ways that they can do that. I want to talk about two. One is the world feels, I think, tumultuous and terrifying to many of us, right? Every day we don't know what change we are going to see, and it is easy for kids to see that anxiety on all of our faces. I think a great antidote for anxiety is agency. And when we give kids the opportunity to own solutions, to try to have a positive impact, that is actually incredibly protective and builds resilience in them. We have a student policy institute in our high school where kids learn about policy issues, they meet with different folks, and they actually then propose and sometimes implement solutions. And that is incredibly healthy for kids, so that rather than feeling like they're subject to what's happening in the world, they actually can positively engage. The second intervention that I will talk about that schools can make is around parenting. Because the world feels scary, and because parents are hearing about risks to youth mental health, I think that when we feel as adults anxious, sometimes what we will do is try to assert control. And that is actually the exact wrong instinct, that in trying to protect kids and keep them safe, we will say, you know what, stay home, it's fine, you can be on your phone, you can be on your computer, but I don't want you out in the world where something bad could happen to you. We are over-indexing the risk of what's happening in the world, and we are under-indexing the risk of being isolated and being engaged with technology. And so trusting our kids in developmentally appropriate ways to be out in the world, to be interacting, to take the bus, to take the metro, to have a job, all of these things are incredibly protective for our kids. And so as schools, how are we communicating to parents that it is okay to trust your child, it is okay to allow them to make some mistakes. In fact, it's really important, rather than trying to protect them and then building this internalized sense of their own fragility.
Yeah. Well, Gretchen, in our final moments, in talking about what we can do for our youth, you talk about how the key to happiness is relationships. What do you think can be done at a young age to kind of get them started on the right footing, so that, you know, where even if they have sort of anxious parents and they're with their phones and other things, as they grow older, they have sort of that foundation already?
Well, I think that's a great question, because while I think it's extremely important to talk about what schools and governments and organizations can do, as we've been talking about what they can do to foster these kind of relationships, part of it is for the people themselves, the young people themselves, to think about, well, this is really important. So I always remind other people and myself, when in doubt about how to spend our precious time, energy, or money to be happier, you're always making a good decision if you spend it on relationships. So if you're thinking like, should I make the effort to go out and go to that meeting? Should I spend the money to buy the $10 ticket to go to that student show, or whatever it is? It takes time, energy, or money sometimes to build these relationships, but it is really something that does set us up for a happier life. And as mentioned, it also makes us healthier, more productive, more creative, better leaders, better team members. And so when we're thinking about how to spend our time and energy, it really is worthwhile to think about relationships. There was interesting information that when people set a goal for themselves, if it was relationship-related goals, like I want to spend more time with my friends, versus something like I want to get a better job, that gave you the bigger happiness boost, because in the end, so much of our happiness does come through our relationships.
That's great. Well, Karen mentioned a challenge. I'm going to challenge all of you the next time you are in line at a coffee shop or the grocery store, don't look at your phone and see what happened. So thank you again for your time.
Please welcome Carlos Curbelo, member of the Board of Directors for the Coalition to Empower Our Future, and Bennett Richardson, General Manager and Head of Global Public Affairs, Semafor.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here, and thanks to all the panelists so far. Congressman Curbelo, thank you so much for joining us. Really excited to have your perspective on stage today. Obviously, you served the 26th District of Florida for many years. Since then, you've been a fellow at Harvard and Columbia and the University of Chicago, so you've got some great perspective. But today, you're representing the Coalition to Empower Our Future, where you're serving on the board of directors. Can you tell us a little bit about the coalition and what got you involved?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for convening us. Thank you all for being here. This conversation is critical, and it means a lot to me in many ways, but especially as the father of 2 teenage daughters. The Coalition to Empower Our Future seeks to, much like you're doing here today, convene a national conversation on this very important issue. And by the way, thank you for the opportunity to talk about happiness. You know, your friends at NBC News and MSNBC and Telemundo call me to talk about a lot of things, never happiness. So even though I love them, this is a special opportunity. But the Coalition to Empower Our Future understands that this is a complex issue, a multifaceted issue that needs a wide range of solutions. And in order to find those solutions, we need to bring all the stakeholders together. Parents, young people, educators, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, clinicians, because this issue is too important to just kind of try to check the box and say like, oh, we're going to pass a tax credit for low-income families, or we're going to make public investments or regulate. I mean, it's so much bigger than that. So the coalition really wants to have a meaningful conversation, and we want that conversation to lead to the full suite of solutions that will help us address this in a meaningful way.
That's great. And obviously you all focus in on, youth mental health and well-being. And what do you think are some of the most significant factors impacting the state of youth happiness today?
Look, this is the #1 issue for young people in the country. I mean, according to the CDC, 1 in 7 young people in this country have some kind of mental health issue, behavioral issue. So this can be found in every family, obviously in every community, every city, every state, the whole country. And this is, your question is kind of the point. There are so many factors. And I've seen all of this as a parent, as a school board member, when I would visit schools, all kinds of schools, low-income schools, higher-income schools. They all deal with this in a different way. But, you have bullying, which there's been, for a couple decades, a good amount of awareness around bullying and how best to handle that. There's obviously economic issues, economic stress. I mean, we know what housing has done to so many families in this country by, stressing their economics and just making it hard for them to have the kind of social mobility that yields stability and happiness. You have, peer pressure. A lot of the issues that we have all become familiar with and more sensitive to over the last couple decades. These are all big factors. And of course, we've heard a lot today about social isolation, parents that aren't as engaged with their children as they should be. And I think that's all of us. I mean, sometimes we're at home and we realize we hadn't seen one of our daughters for 3-4 hours because she's just in her room. Again, the factors are many, and that's why it's critical to have this broad conversation, this inclusive conversation, so that as we develop the solutions, we have all the input we need.
Absolutely. And as you all have been researching and reviewing all those factors, do you think today's young people are experiencing more severe mental health challenges than prior generations?
It certainly seems that way. I mean, a part of this is that we as a society, and this is something we should celebrate, we've become more sensitive to a lot of these issues. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I was down or something, my mom, God bless her, say like, just ignore it, you'll be fine tomorrow, whatever. And I didn't really take the time to figure out if it was something more serious or not. I think we've become better at that, and that's why we are more aware of these issues, and maybe statistically these issues are showing up more than they used to. But I also think there are a lot of new factors, right? And certainly technology is one of them. Kids don't play outside as much as they used to. They don't make the kinds of meaningful social connections that I think we used to as children, probably generations before us used to do even more. So I do think this situation is particularly acute in the current generation.
And I want to pick up there where you left off. As we heard from the last panel, this year's World Happiness Report, finds and reinforced that social connections are significantly enhancing the well-being of young people, but at the same time, that social disconnection is growing, increasingly prevalent among young adults. How do you think society can work to help solve that disconnection and loneliness epidemic?
Well, the good news is this is an issue or a factor where we can all make a contribution. I mean, we can all reach out to a young person, whether it's a child of ours or a nephew or a niece or a grandson, and just try to connect with them, ask them questions, or do something meaningful with them, take them somewhere, go on a fishing trip, whatever it is, right? We can all make contributions. From the perspective of Coalition to Empower Our Future, we're looking for partners, nonprofit partners that are out there trying to encourage the kind of social connectedness that we know we need for a healthy society, that we know we need to meaningfully address these youth mental health issues. So we're looking for partners all over the country that are willing to invest in this space, that are willing to raise social awareness, partner with schools maybe. We know that for lower income families in particular, people who have to show up either to the office or to a job site, it's harder to have that human interaction even within the family. So what can we do to fill those gaps? What role can schools play? After school programs? All of these, from the very beginning, we talk about how the suite of solutions has to be broad and comprehensive, and this is why, because every community has different challenges, every family has different challenges, and if we're going to help bring people together to help our society heal, it's going to require a very broad effort, and the conversation has to be sincere. Again, it can't just be like a check-the-box type of effort where we say, well, mental health, okay, maybe we threw some money at it, maybe we regulated a couple companies, and now everything's okay. It's just not going to work that way.
No, that makes sense. And want to ask you to put your legislator hat back on. During your time in Congress, you served on the House Committee on Education and Workforce. You were leader in the Problem Solvers Caucus. So a lot of relevant experience there. But prior to that, worked closely with Miami-Dade School Board. Share with us, how did that experience in government shape how your perspective on this issue? And especially as you mentioned, be looking forward here, like what do you think is working well and what's not working?
Yeah, when I was on the school board, my children were very young, so I didn't have a full perspective on this, but I remember visiting schools, and this was back 2010, 2011, 2012, and the teachers were the ones sounding the alarm back then. And they were talking about how much harder it was for them to do their jobs now because the kids were just not in a good mental place. And the teachers were dealing with a lot of issues that when I went to school was the counselor. You go to the counselor to deal with issues, but there's so many, it's so prevalent, and it manifests in the classroom in ways where the teachers have to deal with it. So I really gained an appreciation at that point as to how widespread this was. And again, Ben, it wasn't just in low-income schools, because we know that there are issues that are associated with lower income, there's correlations, but this was everywhere, from the lower income schools to the middle income schools to the higher income schools, every race, every cultural background. So visiting those schools really, that's when I first kind of became sensitive to how widespread this was and how it was not just isolated incidents the way we maybe used to think about all of this. And in terms of the policymakers, I certainly think we've done a great job of raising awareness with regards to this issue. I mean, everyone knows this is a challenge, and everyone knows that the government and more broadly society has a role in addressing it together. But I think we're still not there in terms of this idea of broad, comprehensive solutions. And we all know, having been a member of Congress, you want to check the box sometimes. You want to be able to go back home and say, I did this or that to address mental health or whatever the issue is. This issue really requires a whole lot more than that.
Definitely, and looking at some of those boxes that are I think trying to be checked in different places, lots of policies out there, both in the states and in Congress, aimed at addressing youth mental health. Which of those do you think is headed in the right direction? Are there other things you think lawmakers should be doing to address this right now?
Look, I think all the policies that are designed to build community are very important, or to encourage civil society. Yeah, I remember I was a student at the University of Miami in the early 2000s, and we had to read a book for a class called Bowling Alone. And this was in the early 2000s about how social isolation had become such a major challenge, and how we didn't come together back then as a society the way we used to in decades past. Now it's, 10 times worse, and obviously the pandemic exacerbated all of this. So for now, while we're still kind of gathering information, data, input, bringing all these stakeholders together, I think policies that are aimed at building community, at making sure that young people whose parents maybe aren't home have a place to go after school, have people to talk to, have ways in which they can express their anxieties, their fears, their frustrations. All of that helps, and it prevents tragedies, because we know about the most dramatic cases of violence that make national news, but every day in school districts throughout this country, educators are dealing with young people who are struggling and who are acting out in ways that can be dangerous and harmful to others. So, I think for now the best we can do is make sure that we're investing as a society in this kind of social safety net to catch these young people who are struggling. But we certainly have to do a whole lot more, and that's kind of the purpose of the Coalition to Empower Our Future.
Definitely. Well, and as we heard, throughout today, investing and reinforcing those communities is what ultimately leads to more happiness and more well-being. So it's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Congressman, for joining us, and thank you to the Coalition for participating in today's event. Thank you all.
Have you helped a stranger in the last month? How did you feel afterwards? Helping others and the belief that others will help you actually makes you happier. But how you help and how often is affected by the country you live in. The Gallup Happiness Survey asked people worldwide about how often they donated, volunteered, or helped a stranger in the last 30 days. In Latin American countries, helping strangers is the most common form of kindness, while in former Soviet countries, people help more through volunteering. And in the US, people often lend a hand by making donations. That's because of different economic and social structures. Helping strangers in need is a much more common act of kindness in countries with weak institutions and less welfare. And that's because people rely on each other instead of institutions. People who live in the global north tend to help strangers less, but tend to donate more. That's because welfare safety nets reduce the need for helping strangers directly. While how people help others around the world is different, one thing is clear. People are helping each other more now than ever before. People generally want to help others and are likely to choose the best means available, wherever they are.
Please welcome Sarah Conrath, Associate Professor of Philanthropic Studies at Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. Melissa Stevens, Executive Vice President at Milken Institute, Strategic Philanthropy, and Amna Nawaz, co-host at PBS News.
Hello again. Hello, hello. I am so excited for this conversation because joining us now are two experts in giving and philanthropy. They're going to explain to us why giving and generosity are both key drivers of happiness. Sarah and Melissa, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Sarah, kick us off here now. The science behind giving. Explain to us scientifically, literally, what acts of giving do to us.
So many things. I mean, first of all, it just makes you happy. which is, I think we all need a little bit of joy in our lives. And beyond our own happiness, the most important thing is it makes other people happy. That's the whole goal. And it actually has effects on our health. For example, I've done research finding that people who are donating, helping others, actually help them live longer, especially if they're doing it because they care.
And Melissa, tell us from your perspective, because you're advising people on their philanthropic investments, this how it makes you feel question. I mean, how critical is it for people to actually see and feel the impact of their generosity and their giving?
Yeah, I think it's really critical. And to piggyback off of Sarah's comments, we see that giving helps to improve your identity as a problem solver and a change maker, which improves satisfaction and well-being. And we see that even when you're giving and not expecting praise or admiration, you can amplify the effects of that giving. And so we've seen philanthropy over the years. We work a lot with high net worth individuals, families, family foundations, this shift from being just check writers to problem solvers. Typically, traditional philanthropy, as you might think about it, is you're writing a check to an organization. It might be a check big enough that you can get your name on the side of a building, but you're not really involved in the programmatic work. Now, high net worth individuals, philanthropists, are becoming problem solvers. They're not check writers, they're problem solvers. And so they're digging in, they're deeply understanding the problems that they're trying to solve. And many of these are complex, and they're trying to drive systems change, overcoming the climate crisis, overcoming racial injustice, curing disease. They're using a whole set of tools. And so we're seeing that shift from just giving to actually solving problems, which I think reinforces giving. And we see that being able to see the impact and feel the impact that you're having is so important. First, philanthropists want to understand, is it a good investment, right? And so that's just one of the data points that helps them to know, should they continue to give? But I think as they're taking these, taking this longer horizon and solving these complex challenges that are going to take decades, that are going to take not just millions, but billions and trillions of dollars of investment, they need to have some positive feedback loops that continue to motivate them and to really underscore commitment to a cause, not just an organization.
Sarah, on the how it makes you feel question, does the proximity of the giving matter? If we're giving to places that we see the immediate impact or we see a return on investment in some way, does that generate more happiness on the back end?
It does help. It does help to see a clear positive impact of what we're doing, but we have imagination, right? So we can actually empathically imagine people that are far away from us in space or even in time in the future. And with our empathic imaginations, we can actually maximize our own joy of giving, knowing that we're going to make a difference in their lives.
And the impact is the same, regardless of whether people are, I love that phrase, empathic imagination, whether they're using that or whether they're seeing it in their communities.
The impact is maximized. It's bigger. If you see impact, it makes you happier, and if you have an empathic motivation for giving.
So one of the things we hear a lot, either from people visiting from out of country or what we notice about ourselves, America sort of has a more individualistic society and culture, right? How do you, when you're looking through that lens, how does that impact how you're advising people, and how do you factor that into your work, Sarah?
Well, we find other ways to increase our own joy of giving, and one of the ways is to do it with other people. Find other people in your community who are caring like you, and get out there and do good things with them and do good things for them. So if you know somebody who is going through something, maybe a mental health problem or something, you can be there for them, and you can also start working maybe as a volunteer for a mental health charity, or just do what you can with what you have with the people around you. And that also increases our joy of giving. To be clear, giving itself already has a boost, and then when we do it with others, for others, and looking for impact when we do the work, that just makes it bigger.
And as we're advising, we want to make sure that we are bringing in communities that can help us to understand the problems that we're trying to solve and to put forward the solutions. So we want to get out of the mindset that the philanthropists are the ones with the capital know what the solutions should be. Yeah. And so we really bring in those with lived experience, and that is whether you're addressing violence in a community, you are helping veterans to transition into civilian life, again, you're curing disease, you need to bring that community in with you, not just the experts, and to understand the system. There's a saying that's often used, but I think it's worth repeating, like those who are closest to the problem are often closest to the solution, but farthest away from the capital. And so we really see ourselves as advisors is bringing that lived experience to the table to inform where philanthropic capital can and should be deployed. I also think that there is a real opportunity, as Sarah mentioned, to give together. There's collaborative giving is on the rise, which is great.
And we're seeing more of that.
We're seeing more of collaborative giving.
And why do you think that is?
I think I think one is it's actually more satisfying to give together. You're also able to get efficiency. So you can bring together, philanthropies and funders can come together and share resources, they can share diligence, they can share strategy, so they're actually being more effective and efficient with their giving. And it helps funders to be introduced to organizations that might not be in their network. And I think that is something philanthropy needs to do more of. We can't just rely on what comes in referrals in our network. We need to think expansively. What are the organizations and leaders that I might not normally think of or have access to me as a funder?
I'm curious what each of you think the impact of COVID was on all of this. I mean, this being locked down and isolated for so long, this broken sense of community and connection, did that impact how people look at generosity and giving?
People were more likely to give, actually. It increased giving behaviors. And that might seem surprising, but I think we had more time to think about life and the meaning of life, and we saw all this need around us, and we had time. And so a lot more people started giving, and we still see there's still about a 10% higher rate of giving since before COVID in the Gallup World Poll.
Wow.
Yeah,
that as well?
Yeah, we saw that as well, that people were inclined to give more. We saw more creative giving. We saw more trust given to the organizations, so to the nonprofits. So we saw more multi-year giving. We saw more unrestricted giving, where funders would say, we trust you as leaders of these organizations. You know where to be how to be using this capital.
Does that surprise you? I mean, given that we speak at a time about declining trust in institutions, to see that rising trust in specific organizations, why?
Yeah, I think there is a movement and an awareness that, back to we don't have all the answers. Organizations, proximate leaders, they have the answers. And to be able to fund them, to be nimble, to reallocate as needed. If we have things so locked up in fund this specific program, we're not giving the organizations the flexibility that they need and the leaders the flexibility they need to deploy that capital that's going to allow them to do the most good. So there is this movement of trust-based giving, which, yes, is a little bit ironic in the state of the world that we're living in, where we have a deficit of trust.
So I want to dig a little deeper into the science behind all this, Sarah, because you've said the effect of giving is 4 times more impactful on a person's happiness than if they doubled their income overnight. Is that true? How do you measure that?
Well, we measure happiness by asking people how satisfied they are with their life, and you can answer from 0 to 10. And we find that, just imagine for a second, like just right now, your income gets doubled. Okay. Would it make you happier? Everyone's like, yes. Well, the data says it does a little, okay? A little bit, right? But of course, think about all the other stuff that comes with that. It's not so simple. But then what we find is that if you're giving, so you're saying you're volunteering or you're giving money, it doesn't have to be the millions. You're giving what you have, and or you're helping people. It has 4 times the effect of doubling your income. And also, being in an environment where you trust people. It's even more. It's 7 times the effect of doubling your income. So choose the people around you, find good people, and be a good person.
Being in an environment where you trust people around you. Tell us more about that. What does that mean?
Well, that's related to the wallet data from the Gallup World Poll, right? So like the idea of, the question is, do you believe that if you dropped your wallet, that somebody would return it to you, right? And we stop for a minute and think right here, would that happen? I think it would happen in this room. but that's a really powerful psychological concept of just believing that other people are good. And that itself is associated with a lot more happiness. So it's
7 times
more than doubling your income.
Than doubling your income
Yes.
overnight. That is powerful.
It's a little bit,
Yes.
yeah, you don't expect it, right?
Yeah.
And I was just going to jump in and say, and philanthropy can help to seed that. So philanthropy, can we seed programs that bring folks together in communities so that we surround ourselves with people, that we're in community and we can work on service projects together in our communities where we have a shared humanity, we're solving problems together, and we're focusing on what makes us similar rather than what makes us different right now.
Yeah.
And I think if philanthropy can think about building those types of programs, that's going to have a ripple effect.
So you're saying that if we surround ourselves with other givers, then they'll return our wallet?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good tip.
Good to keep in mind. I'm curious over time too. Does the sort of happiness you get from giving, Sarah, does it diminish over time? Is there a sort of surge that comes with the first time you're able to give with your time, with your resources, with your money? Does that go away the longer you give, especially if you're not seeing immediate impacts or returns on the investment? How does that work over time?
That's a really good question. And of course, researchers have looked at it. So basically, following people over time, what we find is that giving has more, kind of holds the high a little longer than getting or than other types of things. So it's not like it's going to be forever, but it does kind of have some staying power and it still feels good. And there are ways to give that can help. For example, like when we eat food, even our favorite food, we don't want to eat tacos every single meal, unless there's somebody maybe here who would say that's not true. but I think most of us eventually, even our favorite food, would get a little bit, less joyful. Well, it's just like that with giving too, and there's research showing that if we're giving in a variety of ways to a variety of people, to different causes, kind of focusing on how to benefit others, then it doesn't get old.
And is there a relationship between the size of the gift too? If you're regularly volunteering once a week versus giving $1 million from your wallet every other month or something for whoever has the means to do that, does that have a different impact on you?
Well, the researchers are only looking at the difference between like $1 versus $20 at the moment, but we are exploring ultra high net worth individuals, and we'll have an answer soon.
Yeah. Okay.
But volunteering, when we found that volunteering is really, it's good. The more you can do it, there's up to about 15 hours a week is usually the kind of peak.
Yeah.
But giving more time, it's because you're kind of giving yourself. When you're volunteering, you're actually there, and it's more than just like writing a check, as you were talking about. Whereas giving money, it does make you happy, but I don't think it's not gonna be like the more you give, the happier you get, right?
So the theme, Melissa, as you know, the theme of this year's World Happiness Report is sharing and caring, which is a phrase we use all the time in my household with 2 little girls. But what does that mean to you? How do you interpret that now, especially in the philanthropic space?
Yeah. Well, I think we're in a moment in time right now where philanthropy is more important than ever. I think especially as we're looking here in the United States, we're looking at retrenchment of federal funding and government funding, that there is an opportunity for philanthropy to be leaning in this moment. And we know that philanthropy cannot close the funding gap. Like there's orders of magnitude difference, but I think there is a time to lean in right now, to be thinking about all the different ways that you can be giving. So we talked about volunteering and time. We've talked about treasures, your financials, but there's your time, your ties, or your network, your testimony, or your voice, your technology. I mean, there's so many different ways to be giving, and I think if we're more creative about the ways that we are giving and activating all of those different assets that we have, we can be more efficient, we can be more effective, we can have a better impact. I think it's a time to come together in collaboration right now and to be sort of linking arms with other funders, again, sharing. And fundamentally, we're going to need to reimagine what the nonprofit sector looks like here. And no one has the answer to that, but it is a time for philanthropists to be leaning in and to be making a difference.
Sarah, I'll give you the last word here. What do you hope people take away when it comes to the science behind giving?
That we all have something to give, and that it's not about us, it's about others. So I think just realize that happiness is not individual. I think that's been the message of today, that it's social. And you're all here, you all came here, so you know that. But we have hope that the giving we do can actually make a difference.
We'll end on a note of hope. Thank you for that. Sarah Conrath, Melissa Stevens, thank you so much.
In the US and Western Europe, populism is on the rise and moderates are falling behind. While divided politically, the far left and far right are united by something: their lack of trust in the system and its institutions. But what explains these shifts to both ends of the political spectrum? It might be about how much we trust others. Those who don't trust the system but have higher levels of trust in people tend to swing to the left. And those who don't trust the system and have low levels of trust in others tend to swing towards the right of the political spectrum. The Gallup World Poll found this trend applies to both cultural and economic beliefs. In the United States, people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020 tended not to trust strangers, regardless of their age or educational background. People who reported very low levels of life satisfaction and low levels of trust tended to stay home on election day. In the US, trust in others is at its lowest point in the last 50 years. Can this be reversed?
Please welcome E.J. Dion, Senior Fellow at Brookings, Gerardo Bertin, Vice President of International Programs at Freedom House, Hillary Silver, Professor of Sociology, International Affairs, and Public Policy and Public Administration at George Washington University, and Morgan Chalfant, Deputy Washington Editor.
Thank you all so much for being here. This is going to be a really insightful discussion. EJ, I just wanted to start with you. So the data in this report is clear that the decline in social trust and happiness in the US and Europe has led to a rise in political polarization and populism. Just wondering, just first, what was your reaction to the findings?
Well, first, let me say thank you to Gallup, and that's a thank you all the way back, because Gallup has asked good questions for decades and decades, and everybody who does any kind of research or citizens who want to understand politics is grateful to Gallup. And also, I got to mention the late Andy Kohut, who was the president of Gallup way back and is one of the great survey researchers ever, and also one of the great human beings in that community. So it's an honor to, and thank you to Semafor. I met Ben Smith when he was in his early 20s, and I knew this guy is going somewhere, and a pundit is always grateful when he or she is right, because often we're dead wrong, but I was right about Ben. Let me say I found this study very illuminating, very helpful, and I think there is, the finding on social trust and the difference it makes in voting for left parties or right parties is extremely important. And I think we were talking, Hillary and I were talking before, and she'll probably talk a bit more about this. If you looked at the recent German elections, who voted for Die Linke, the left-wing party, and who voted for the AfD, the far-right party, you really saw some of these factors at work. So I thought that was very helpful. But the second thing is, I think this paper is not a magic bullet, but it opens up new questions, because I think that one of the key questions here is what has reduced social trust? Why, in other words, trust itself is a real thing, and I think it's something we need to think about more. But why have people, particularly on the right, lost trust? What role has immigration itself played in creating more diverse societies? And have diverse societies, for some people, created greater feelings of mistrust? We have had a rather substantial change in the social values, dominant social values of the society. How much has that decreased trust? And the third point I'd make that I would underscore, if there's a critique of the paper I have, I do think it underplays still the role of economics. And its own data suggests that economics is really important, because happiness, the perceived happiness, is linked in part to economic position. And they note that GDP doesn't seem to have anything to do with happiness, and that's probably true, but GDP is about everyone, the whole society, and it doesn't speak to relative deprivation in the society, a great concept of British social scientist W.G. Runciman did great work on this many years ago. And the fact that societies have gotten richer and yet large parts of the society feel poorer or falling behind, I think does increase happiness. So I think what we need to do is take these really useful findings and link them to new questions. But I think it sets us on a good path.
And I'm glad you mentioned the role of economics, because I wanted to ask you, Hillary, just about that finding in the report that basically economic growth not necessarily is what's driving this, but a feeling of financial insecurity and loneliness that stems from what the report says is a damaged social fabric. This is particularly in communities, lower educated Americans, and rural areas and younger Americans as well. I'm just wondering how you think this sets up the scenario in which populism can thrive, and what you can make of those findings.
Right. Well, so the chapter that you gave us to look at looks at life dissatisfaction or life satisfaction as an indicator of happiness. And social trust sort of amplifies the differences between right and left responses to unhappiness. And typically you think that people who are economically insecure would swing left, but many of them move right. So there's these two kinds of populism are at work. We did a study with European data a few years ago, and I found that left-wing xenophobia, fear of immigrants and so on, it didn't necessarily have to do with how many immigrants there were in the country. It was more a sense of estrangement, right? Feeling insecure, right? Not just financially, but also in terms of identity. Whereas on the left, xenophobia exists also on the left, fear of migrants, but the solutions were seen as more, that they should be more redistributive, right? The solutions would be a stronger welfare state and so on. In rural areas and in regions of Europe where there's been a long-term deindustrialization, that is coupled with out-migration. It's the loss of the next generation. And so these places are not only left behind, but the institutions in those communities that used to be supportive by a critical mass of people start to collapse too. So consider church attendance, right? Church attendance is difficult to do if you're in a rural area and there are very few people who go. Similarly, in small towns, to see small businesses and other institutions people were used to, those kinds of things disappear. Finally, what we do see is that class still matters, but it's class expressed as a divide between higher education and lower education, people who don't have college. And we see this in voting for populist parties, both in the United States, but also in most countries, even in the Nordic countries, we're seeing a division in attitudes and social trust based upon education level.
And Gerardo, obviously the report focuses on the US and Western Europe, but based on your research, do you see any parallels to other places in the world? Are there other examples that we should be looking at in terms of similar scenarios playing out?
Thank you very much for the invitation and for encouraging this conversation. One thing that I want to mention is, Freedom House has been doing an analysis of political rights and civil liberties for. That's what she's Julia too.
No.
This is Julia Staley.
Hi. I'm just.
There you go. Thank
you.
Sorry about that. Again, thank you for the invitation. And what I was saying is Freedom House has been publishing a report on political rights and civil liberties since 1973. And this year, we just published a few weeks ago, and it is the 19th year of consecutive declines in civil liberties and rights in the world. Now, one interesting thing to connect to the happiness report is that of the top 25 countries in the happiness report, 23 in the Freedom House report happen to be free. So there is actually a correlation between rights, freedoms, and liberties and happiness. Finland, Costa Rica, Iceland are there, actually, and certainly it's an important element to convey. I think one thing that I would say in terms of just adding to the conversation on the chapter 7 on trust, I think it focuses mainly on institutions, I think, more than on interpersonal trust, which is important. And I think it does not distinguish that well, probably, elections that take place in free countries and elections that take place in non-free countries. Russia, Nicaragua, Venezuela, who are not free in our index, hold elections to legitimize their authoritarian power. And they're very different because oppositions cannot actually have the right to actually express their opinions. And so certainly that's a factor to consider. Elections were also in our report based on the analysis that we did on all of the elections that took place in 2024. In 40% of those elections, there was a way to disrupt the election in one way or another, whether it was assassination attempts for the candidates, all the way to harassment in the polls. And that was a diverse from countries that are considered free and countries that are considered actually not free or partially free. But that's an element also to consider. And someone mentioned this morning, I think, in the first panel, the issue of peace and stability as part of the happiness. And certainly our report also adds to that in the context of saying that countries that are not peaceful certainly don't enjoy the same rights and liberties that countries that are actually in some sort of peace. And so that makes also a little bit of a difference, I would say.
And EJ, I want to go back to you about sort of the implications of this, particularly for the U.S. What does this mean for the political middle? The rise of populism, you see the U.S. dropping in the unhappiness score, people on the unhappy people gravitating toward the left and the right. I mean, is the middle just going to dissipate? What do you see sort of short and long term for our politics?
As Bill Clinton might say, it depends on what the meaning of the word middle is, in this context. I think what you are seeing, and I think the paper illustrates this well, is a decline of the center right and center left. And a kind of fragmentation. And again, this comes from a conversation Hillary and I had in the green room, where you see that in countries with multi-party systems, where you can actually see the whole spectrum of voting, you've seen a decline in both center-left and center-right parties. That's been particularly dramatic in Germany, where the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats have been forced into a coalition government. They were the two big parties getting 80-90% of the vote. Now they're barely managing half the vote, and you're seeing fragmentation to the left and the right of them. In the U.S., it's complicated because the Trump vote really is a combination of the far right, and Trump would probably be in another country a far right candidate. But the old Republican parties, large parts of that electorate, which might in some ideological sense be center-right, has mostly fallen in line behind Trump. So we have this very odd situation, and his power in the party means that center-right is virtually silenced inside his party. On the Democratic side, as Democrats do, they're fighting each other and on a lot of questions. That old Will Rogers line, I don't belong to an organized political party, I'm a Democrat. And and so I think both the center-left and the left are kind of more visible, and that fight is easier for everyone to see. I think the Trump challenge, it will be interesting to see if the Trump challenge actually brings the center-left, the left and parts of the center back together again. The key to Joe Biden's victory in 2020 is that he rallied significant part of the center with the center-left and the left. Right now, the Democrats are torn up over this. I think the logic of the situation will likely bring those forces together, because otherwise they can't possibly challenge Trump effectively.
Yeah, and certainly we've seen that with the anger that Chuck Schumer provoked recently with his handling of the debt ceiling, which I thought of when I was reading this. The last thing I wanted to talk about, and this is sort of a question for all of you or any of you that wants to weigh in, just in terms of rebuilding social trust, what are the solutions here? What institutional reforms do you think could help address that in the United States?
Does that come to me?
Sure.
I'm happy.
You're going to solve the problem for us right here, right now.
I just want to say I'm happy to answer that. I think there are a few things. There have been strong, many initiatives in Europe, but also in the U.S. to try to encourage more social inclusion of those who are on the margins of the society. So there are a number of ways to go about it. One is a more general thing that could be for everyone, which is to improve access to public space and to make those spaces available to everyone. One of the things that's unspoken in all of this is how our cities have increasingly privatized public space out of this sense of insecurity. An attempt to create greater safety has also been an exclusionary process where people feel that they're under surveillance and so forth, right? So that we don't have a public square where everyone can assemble and meet across differences. If the opposite is that we're seeing public space being curtailed, right? So very few places to meet across social differences. And that's exacerbated by residential segregation, right? If rich people only live with rich people and poor people only live with poor people, then the institutions are also homogeneous in this way. So we don't build a good civil society where everybody can deal with differences and work towards common solutions. Moreover, just to build trust through things like, Labor Day parades, or, well, I guess 4th of July parades, right? The institutions that used to bring an entire community together have fallen by the wayside, and part of it is segregation. So I would say we can strengthen the availability of public space and push against exclusionary privatization of spaces, and again, to try and develop local activities or found new nonprofits and associations in places where people across differences can meet on the basis of something that's constructive and productive, like a common goal of some kind, that doesn't have to do with politics.
Thank you all. We are actually out of time. This has been a wonderful discussion, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please welcome Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar and Justin B. Smith, co-founder and CEO of Semafor.
Good morning, everybody. This is the penultimate conversation of the World Happiness Summit, and could think of no better person, really, in the entire world to interview than Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. I'm just going to give it a short but formal introduction. Gurudev is a global humanitarian, spiritual leader, and ambassador of peace. His programs for health and holistic well-being have impacted more than 800 million people in more than 180 countries around the world. Gurudev believes that inner peace is the key to peace in the world outside. He seeks to build bridges between beliefs and religions to universalize wisdom and foster greater compassion, love, and mutual understanding for a stress-free and violence-free society. Not a bad mission statement.
Thank you.
So welcome and thank you so much for joining us on World Happiness Day. It's really a great privilege. A personal question. Can you share with us the first time in your life when you developed an insight or maybe even an epiphany on this notion of how to become a happy and fulfilled person?
Well, from my young days, I always dreamt of a society free from violence. Wherever there was conflict, I wanted to jump in and then separate the parties, That has been my tendency. Then this idea, growing up with my teacher who has been with Mahatma Gandhi for 4 decades, and I was always inspired by a non-violent movement in society. So we grew up, though I have never seen Mahatma Gandhi, he had gone long before I was born, but the people who stayed with him, who lived with him, were one of my inspirations. They used to tell me stories about those days with him, and he would, how with such a resolute mind, he would go hold on to the principle of nonviolence. And, this ancient thought of the world is one family was always ringing in my mind. So as a child, I used to say to my friends, I have family all over the world, and I want
As a young child?
I was just 8, 9-year-old.
Okay.
But then my friends would come and ask my mother, and she would just scold me, why do you tell lies?
Imaginary friends.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that was almost like a compulsion in me. I had to say that, I know somewhere in my subconscious mind that's what was coming out.
That's beautiful. So you once said that, as preparing for this interview, I was looking at some of your past comments, and you once said, ask me the questions that Google can't answer. And so I Googled, how can I be happy? And Google gave me 6 answers. Practice gratitude, engage in regular exercise, prioritize sleep, practice mindfulness, cultivate relationships, and set reasonable goals. So how would you answer it if Google said that?
De-stress yourself. Stress is the main cause of unhappiness. You can't say, I'm happy and I'm so stressed. They can't coexist, you see? And if you're not stressed, nothing can make you unhappy.
So this is the notion of inner peace.
Absolutely.
Being the sort of the key to happiness.
Yeah. Like beauty is an inner experience. Joy is an experience from inside. It's a state of your mind. Same is happiness. And inside, if you're all muddled up and so stressed up and we're angry, agitated, or anxiety and uncertainty in the mind, happiness, though it is our true nature, we will not be able to experience it.
So this morning we announced, or Gallup announced, that Finland and a few of the other Nordic countries, Iceland, had been named the happiest countries in the world. You travel all around the world. Does the data sync up with your experience? Are you surprised that the Scandinavian countries keep on winning?
As far as Scandinavian countries, yes, my experience is, yes, they are happier because they have very little thing to worry about themselves. They worry about the whole world. They worry about the environment. They worry about the other nations in the world. That's something I can vouch for.
Interesting. And since you also have so much experience working with government leaders and civic leaders, do you think it's possible for individuals, leaders, governments to actually design and build large-scale communities of happy people, or even design and build happy countries?
Yeah, I think that should be one of their agenda. Not just giving shelter and food to people, but see that people are happy. In this happiness index, though I don't agree with India, that's my the India's ranking, because I have traveled length and breadth of India. So it's not bad as it is in the conflict regions of Ukraine or Israel or even Mexico.
Afghanistan is the lowest on the list.
And also Pakistan, for example. So India is doing much better. There is so much more caring, and every home, when people start to de-stress themselves, learn to meditate, or share a meal together, it makes a big difference. And you can find this in many poorer countries. Poverty is not actually related to unhappiness, nor happiness related to richness. I've seen this around the world, believe me. I've seen the poorest colonies. There is so much more compassion among people and togetherness. They jump out to help each other. There is more community feeling in the slums than in urban areas. So I would say we must look into these parameters where we see happiness as an inner state rather than just what they are surrounded with. Of course, that counts, but this is one more fact that one must see, the state of mind, how less tense they are, how more confident they are, how zeal and enthusiasm they are bonding themselves with others.
So America dropped to the 24th, I think it's several years of a decline in American happiness. And obviously you see huge spikes in loneliness and other factors. And I think the political environment is more divided in this country than it's been in a very long time. It's sort of the red and the blue states. Can some of your ideas on de-stressing and communication address some of these problems around polarization and division in America? What's your advice to America?
I'm more concerned about the youth of America. There is less and less social interaction. And you see the two extremes among the youth here. Either they are very aggressive. Violence has skyrocketed in many cities, like Chicago, or Los Angeles, and other places. I mean, mindless violence. On the other hand, suicidal tendency and depression has increased. So the only way to get rid of these two extreme behavior, I feel, is to give them the wellness program. Teach them how to handle their emotions. Neither at school nor at home, we learn something, any technique that can help us to actualize ourselves. This is where we have started the Sky for campus programs in universities around US. Today we are in 145 universities.
And Sky is a meditation program?
Meditation, breathing, and many other small techniques by which they can regulate their emotions.
So, I mean, if we were, if you could leave one idea or one practice or recommendation to everyone in this room to de-stress, what would it be?
Don't take happiness too seriously.
I heard you in the green room saying you're happy about happiness.
There was a talk on happiness, and someone kept talking for 2 hours, and everybody became so unhappy. I don't want to be in that category.
Well, good. Well, listen, Gurudev, thank you so much for having this conversation. And now we have the real privilege of closing the World Happiness Summit with a guided meditation led by Gurudev. So I will exit stage right, but first, please join me in thanking Gurudev for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can be here. You can be here. Huh?
Okay.
We'll do it together. Come.
Okay.
I'm going to lead you in a short meditation. This will be short. We all breathe, right? Otherwise you won't be here. You're all breathing, and we also blink our eyes. Not only when we don't know the answer, but even otherwise. Right? Today we are going to synchronize our breath with our eye movement. How is that? Are you ready for it? See, let's see what happens. It's a simple thing. Okay, I'll add one more thing. Movement of our hands. Let's keep our palms open. And eyes closed. Now, let's bring our fingers together and breathe in and open our eyes. Open your eyes wide. Hold the breath. And as you breathe in, breathe out, open your fingers and let's close our eyes. Synchronizing breath with the eye movement. We breathe in and open the eyes, and we breathe out and close our eyes. Let's do this with the finger movement as well. Eyes open, all the fingers together, and as we close our eyes, the palms open, breath out. Let's do this now 5 times. Breathe in. Breathe out. Just breathe in. Eyes open. And breathe out. Now let's sit back and relax. Eyes closed, body relaxed. Become aware of the weight of your body. Whatever that is, don't have to be shy about it. 80, 90, 100 kilos. 200 pounds, 250 pounds, whatever it is. Just become aware of the weight of your body. Let's take another deep breath in and hold the breath. And as you breathe out, relax your whole body. And place the weight of your body on the chair you are sitting. Let's remember our age as well. when we came into this planet, we weighed only 3 kilos or 5 pounds, 6 pounds. And today we weigh 80 kilos or 200, 300 pounds. Let's become aware the chair we are sitting is carrying the weight of our body. Let's take another deep breath in and breathe out and relax even more. Honor your own body. It's the most precious gift you have received in life. Let's take our attention to our feet. Relax the feet, the legs, knees and thighs, shoulders, and the whole body. Let's keep a big smile. Breathe in with a smile. And breathe out with a smile. As you smile, all the muscles in your face gets relaxed. Become aware of the air all around you and inside of you. Like the fish in the water, we are in air. Let's breathe in and breathe out. Incoming breath energizes the body, and outgoing breath brings relaxation. Let us become familiar with this phenomenon. Let's move on to the third dimension, the mind. Our body is like the wick of a candle. The mind is like the glow all around it. As the body relaxes, the mind expands. Whatever thoughts are coming in the mind, just let them come. Good thoughts, bad thoughts, just welcome them all. Embrace them all. Next couple of minutes, let's let go of all our effort. Next few moments, there is nothing to do and nothing to know either. Just be and relax. Become aware of the vast space. And let's take a deep breath in with a big smile. And breathe out with a smile. Let the smile percolate to the back of our head. Let the smile percolate to our throat, chest, arms, and the whole body. Let's take our attention to the top of the head and become aware of the empty space above the head. Another deep breath in with a big smile. And breathe out with a big smile. And you may gently open your eyes. That's it, 20 minutes, 15 minutes or so.
On behalf of Gallup and Semafor and our partners, thank you very much. And I just would like to say a few final closing remarks, which is it's been wonderful to have everyone here for this series of conversations. It's an incredibly urgent and important topic. And how wonderful to have, on the one hand, Gallup, which is the most important organization in the world, tracking the data and the information on this critical subject. They're an outlier in terms of how deeply invested they are in this subject, on the one hand. On the other hand, to have Gurudev, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, who is also an outlier in his own way as one of the most significant leaders practicing this mission of non-stress and non-violence.